Now let's see if this can actually remember to work. Okay, good. We got it. Whew, that took ages. Let's just make sure I can actually hear it. Let's make sure I can actually hear it. Let's make sure I can actually hear it. And I'm waiting for my... Come on, play that. Let's make sure I can actually hear it. Let's make sure I can hear it. There we go. Lovely. Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. Basically, just had some technical issues. Fixed it. Well, I didn't fix it. I just started again, didn't I? Like, that's not fixing it. That's giving up and just starting over. Anyway. Speaking of fixing it, I'm not doing anything about the fact some people's comments don't show up in the chat. That's beyond me as a thing to do. Anyway, so just one thing, which is I was just going to briefly summarize what we saw in part 1, which was Scarlett, this person I'm responding to, essentially was addressing, I think, almost entirely my first argument. And my first argument was pretty much that since there is one obviously correct religion, that points to it being likely that God exists, because God would be providentially influencing it. So there's one particular religion that stands out as more obviously correct. And also, in general, I think it's a good principle to say that if there's a series of options and one of those options just stands out as like, oh, wait, this one seems way more credible, it's likely that to pick one makes sense. That's basically my position, whatever. I'm obviously just giving a summary here, just so we have context. And so far, I don't think Scarlett's response has been great. She could have shown how... Because what I did in my previous video, again, you should probably watch it, is I argued that many other religions had serious issues and that Christianity had no serious issues. She really didn't engage with either of those arguments. She didn't show that... She didn't even address or even acknowledge any of my criticisms of other religions, and she didn't make a very good criticism of Christianity. The only criticism of Christianity she said so far is that she personally... it doesn't make sense to her. But she didn't provide a concrete example of what exactly didn't make sense, beyond just finding the idea of substitutionary atonement nonsensical. Whatever. Blake says, oh, by the way, thank you everyone, Ricknell and Blake. From what I remember watching the playback, it's just her saying, I disagree, basically. Yeah, I don't think she made any concrete arguments. I'm kind of the opinion that... I'm just trying to think. There was no moment where I was like, oh, that's a really solid argument. So we'll see how it goes in this time. I'm aiming to finish this all in one part, so we'll see how we do. Or, finish the rest of it in one remaining part.
What in your mind beyond a magic man in the sky?
Oh, and by the way, yeah, so my audio quality, for some reason, the way she downloaded it made the audio quality terrible.
Oh, yeah, like we haven't already done that. But anyway, I want us to hold on to this phrase that KC says right here, a magic man in the sky, because having watched the video in full, I feel like that's pretty much what he thinks exists, except the sky is outside our universe or something, and magic man is just a magic brain without a brain, like a mind, no brain.
I'll close by acknowledging again that this isn't technically an argument for God. Nothing I've said here should compel a belief in God.
Well, that's a relief, because I sure didn't hear an argument.
But I do wonder...
I will say, going back, I actually think this is more strong of an argument than I gave it credit for. And this is something that I have a plan to elaborate on this in a later video. But I actually... I say, so I elaborate. So even though I say it's not technically an argument for God, I elaborate on the strength of it just now, and this bit is going to be played. So I'll let past me make the point.
Does anyone actually think it would make sense for me to be an atheist who believes in my heart of hearts that there is one religion that stands out as obviously way more valid and likely to be true than any other? If that does make sense, why do so many atheists refuse to even consider going down that line of inquiry and instead commit to taking it on faith that all religions, despite making radically different claims, are somehow magically all equally implausible?
This is easy. I don't believe in any God. I have considered different God beliefs, and they all fail for me. So no God, no religion.
Oh my goodness, right. Okay, I'm going to see if it continues. But notice what I said there. I said, why is it that atheists are so terrified to just get into that really simple question of, evaluating religious claims relative to each other? Why are atheists so unable to just say, well, let me look at the claims of Islam compared to the claims of Christianity and see which one makes the most sense? Why do they refuse to go down that route? And then I was thinking like, oh, she's going to interrupt and she's going to say, oh no, I'm perfectly willing to go down that route. Like, genuinely, I'll admit I have a serious weakness, and it's I doubt myself too much. I always assume the people I'm going to be having to respond to are going to basically counteract me in a way that's going to really put me on the back foot. But she pretty much just did exactly what I said they do, right? She just went, well, I don't believe in God, so I don't have any interest in really thinking about any of this. I've looked at it all, it's all nonsense. And no actual recognition of what I'm saying, which is, well, why do you have no ability to think in terms of one being more correct than the other? It's also interesting, she didn't ask, even though she showed it, she didn't answer the first question I asked. Because I think that is an interesting question. Like I said, technically speaking, that there is one religion, which makes way more sense than any other religion, isn't strictly a fantastic argument for that religion being true as opposed to no religion. But why is it, or do you think it would make sense for me to be someone who believes there's one religion that is way more obviously true and yet still to pick no religion? That's all I'm asking. So we'll see if more is said.
Sure, religions all make different claims about a god.
One moment.
But without a god to start you off, none of the rest of the path makes sense. None of these religions seem more valid to me. I know you said earlier.
Yeah, see, and that's the crazy thing. The inability. Okay, you know what is it? It's like the meme. How would you feel if you didn't have breakfast this morning? But I did have breakfast this morning. Have you guys heard that? It's like a thing of people with very low IQs aren't able to understand hypothetical questions, and where people were asked, how would you feel if you didn't have breakfast this morning? And people who generally scored incredibly low in terms of intelligence were not able to answer the question. They just said, but I did have breakfast this morning. That's kind of the vibe here of like, if you did believe in God, which religion would you find most compelling? And she's saying, well, without the starting point of believing in God, how can I even go down that route of inquiry?
The atheist must think it's easy to establish God belief. It's trivial. But it isn't. I don't see any reason to believe in any God. I don't see any evidence of one.
To me, there does seem to be an evident contradiction between saying, yeah, religion is all ultimately total bunk, while at the same time recognizing there is this one religion credible than any other.
I don't see any religion as being more credible.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I'm becoming disheartened because now I'm feeling like actually the quality of argumentation is low enough. What I like the Goldilocks zone, where the arguments aren't good enough that I actually lose. I mean, to be honest, if the arguments are really good, that they change my mind, I mean, that's not a bad thing for me, because now I get to believe the correct beliefs. But it just might make it would be awkward in terms of me doing these live streams. It would be very awkward if one day I come across an atheist or a Muslim or a Catholic who is just so good at arguing that I actually have to on stream change my opinion. But that's whatever. That's one side. But then the flip side is someone who's so bad at arguing that it's no longer entertaining. And I like things that are in the middle, where it's stretch achievable. The arguments are good, they're engaging what I'm saying, and then there's kind of a fun in responding to them, which I'm now realizing is lacking here. Because obviously, what I'm saying is that I looked into religious claims, I engaged in a comparative religious study, and I saw that Christianity was way more credible than any other religion. And I'm asking now, do atheists agree that with that being the case, it would make sense to then believe in God? And it's so far a lot of atheists have basically made the argument for me then, because I said, I'm not sure if this is actually a great reason not to be an atheist. But a lot of atheists are saying, no, actually it is. Oh, by the way, thank you. Yeah. Anyway, we'll proceed.
Than any other. Like, what are you talking about? I think...
Again, you literally skipped over the parts of my video where I spoke about that, and the only argument you gave against Christianity was not very good.
Some are less toxic than others, and there are some cool rituals in some, but...
Okay, and notice, by the way, again, complete, just personal, subjective. Oh, some of them are toxic. Some of them are that they don't have the cool rituals. No consideration of, well, which of them actually make the most credible historical claims? Which of them make the most philosophically robust claims, or the claims that are defensible in that regard? Which of them are, have a internally consistent, coherent theological framework? These are some pretty basic questions that you should be thinking to ask, rather than just immediately thinking, well, how am I supposed to evaluate them apart from which ones have the coolest rituals?
They aren't credible.
In order to debunk this, an atheist would have to show that there is some issue with Christianity that does in fact make it not any more markedly credible than other religions.
Are we going to get it? Oh, okay. I'll be really excited if we're going to get an actual good argument against Christianity. Let's see.
Debunk what? Did I miss something?
Yeah. So just for the record, you literally just admitted functionally with your refusal to actually engage with what I was saying that the argument I was presenting was a credible argument for Christianity being true, or for atheism being false specifically. So far, I would say you have sufficiently, in your refusal to engage with this question of evaluating religions relative to each other, that actually presents a serious threat for atheism. So yeah, you've got to debunk it.
Look, for me it's easy. No God exists. No God, no incarnated God that got crucified, none of it. By the way, it should be up to you to show that all this is true, that your God exists.
And I did, but you refused to engage with that. I don't know. Okay, whatever.
And that he was sacrificed and that it removes sin, or whatever it is you believe. It shouldn't be up to me to show you why that's not true. You should be offering some kind of positive evidence.
Yes, and I did. And then I'm saying to debunk this positive evidence, someone would have to show there's a problem with Christianity. This should not be that difficult to follow. And there are actually a few moments in this video where Scarlett has demonstrated an inability to recognize what the argument I'm actually making is.
If Christianity does stand out as way more credible than any other religion, that suggests something pretty special about the Bible, and I imagine most atheists would be reluctant to admit that.
Yeah, reason two.
Yeah, I don't think Christianity stands out as way more credible. I'm not sure how we got here, but anyway.
Hello, cast to buy now. Good to have you here.
Well, you're just asserting it, and I'm still waiting for proof that you have the one true religion and this rigorous testing.
And this leads to reason number two, I'm not an atheist, miraculous scripture. A question I really hate is, why are you a Christian? Well, compared to what? There is technically no good reason to believe any theory, because any theory should only be believed because it is more credible than all other theories.
It is a little funny that we're on this tangent instead of talking about the miraculous scripture that he was talking about, but fine, we're on this fun ride.
Yeah, okay, it's because it's called, the way you, make a video is that you sort of weave it together, you go from one point into another. You might actually be trying to communicate other ideas. For example, I'm communicating here a part of my process of how I thought about this question of how to be an atheist, of why I'm not an atheist. This is quite a common thing to do. It's actually pretty useful when you're taking a question seriously to kind of talk through this idea of, well, here's how I approach it, here's where I'm approaching it from. But okay, let's see.
I just want to pop in here to say that it's not just about being credible. It's about what evidence you have for your theory. Or really, I think he means hypothesis. I think this is like a loose version of theory. But, what evidence do you have? Where does it lead you? And by the way, since we're off to reason two, I have to say I'm disappointed we didn't hear about the rigorous testing Critical did to establish how he...
You did. You skipped over it. Whatever. You literally skipped... I can't.
He determined his religion is the correct one. We just got his mistake on the geographical argument and a challenge to prove him wrong by wasting our lives reading a book. A challenge that still isn't clear to me, the debunking, because I don't quite know what his conclusion about it was. Maybe we'll get here, because this is the miraculous scripture, so maybe this is where we're going to hear where his conclusion is.
So if you ask me why I'm a Christian, I immediately want to start talking about the alternative things I could be, and why I don't think those things are credible in contrast to Christianity.
Why? Is it a diversion from establishing your own belief?
No, okay. I literally, in that last section, explained how the problem with just answering the question entirely in positive terms of why do I believe something is that, as I said, there is technically speaking no justification for believing something that can be entirely established solely with positive evidence, because everything has to be evaluated relative to the other things it could be. Even with like basic things like the theory of gravity. If someone's, you cannot say that the theory of gravity makes sense until you've considered, well, are there any other alternative theories that might explain it better? Any theory, you have to do this. And you said that was an irrelevant tangent. And now, after I've said that, you've gone, why don't you want to just make a positive case for Christianity? Why do you immediately think in terms of what are the alternatives and why don't they hold up? It's just frustrating. It's just a little bit, I think, a tiny bit stupid to literally play me saying something. And I think this has happened multiple times. Scarlett has called out things I'm saying when she's literally just shown a clip of me explaining exactly why I'm doing the thing. Atheists.
The issue is, if an atheist asks me why I'm a Christian and I start talking about my issues with Catholicism, Judaism, Islam,
Exactly.
they're going to get confused. When someone asks me why I'm a Christian, I therefore assume that I can't give any response that takes for granted that I'm comparing it to a specific alternative. As such, it has to be an argument that is entirely a positive case. Christianity is true because of this thing it's saying that makes it likely to be true, regardless of what alternative is being suggested.
Yeah, but what it sounds like to me is that you've accepted the Judeo-Christian God and you've now decided...
You really hit the nail on the head of the not understanding hypotheticals. Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. Okay, so wait, hold on. I want to...
Is being suggested.
Yeah, but what it sounds like to me is that you've accepted the Judeo-Christian God and you've now decided which ramblings about him you like best. Why can't you talk about...
What are you saying? Where are you coming from there? That's got nothing to do with anything I just said. I have no idea where this is coming from. Okay, I think the issue is my growing frustration is I've gone from thinking this video is somewhat interesting to now realizing we are just in Dunning-Kruger territory. At least her avatar is cute. Yeah, I guess. Kind of. I mean... You know, I'm just saying, when it comes to like anime, I think it can get cuter. But yeah. Okay.
About your own beliefs in isolation. Why must you decide that one is more probable than the other? Maybe
I don't need to. It is the case that one is.
maybe they're all wrong.
Yes, maybe they are all wrong. But... Again, flashback, first part, first argument, I said that I think that if one of them is way more credible than the rest, then that means that one's probably true. You've just implicitly said that the alternative to one of them being more likely is that they're all wrong, suggesting that if one of them is more likely, they're not all wrong. It's just... Carlsbite, it does bother me that atheism's insistence on positive evidence, as it feels like the existence/absence of God is a contextual claim about reality. As such, a claim that's a default contextual claim, and then saying any alternative theory needs positive evidence feels like a misconstrued approach to the question. Don't know if I'm onto anything or if I'm mistaken, but I don't know. I kind of see what you're saying, right? I think I am. It's a situation... I mean, the whole like burden of proof thing in general, I think is, in principle, quite cowardly, and a lot of the time inaccurate. I think someone is just obsessed with trying to say that they don't have to provide evidence for their position is usually being a little bit disingenuous. And in my case, because I have arguments for everything I believe, and I have arguments for most of the things that I reject, because again, to reject something is a belief. If you reject something, you're saying, I believe that there's not enough evidence for this thing, whatever. I'm not that interested in talking about burden of proof all the time. There is an interesting kind of cowardly bent to a lot of atheism where they're very obsessed with minimizing the for the not actually having to defend a strong claim.
Like when I'm asked, why am I a Christian, without any qualifiers, and that's a question I'm asked very often, I always give the same response: the miraculous theological coherence of the Bible.
The what of the what now?
The miraculous theological coherence of the Bible.
The Bible is coherent?
Because if the Bible is miraculously theologically coherent, then that alone is enough reason to dismiss any other possible alternative I'm aware of.
Theologically turns out to mean does not mean it reflects reality. You could have a system that all makes internal...
Okay, no, I said the miraculous theological coherence of the Bible. If the Bible is miraculously theologically coherent, then atheism's false, right? Because atheists don't believe in miracles. Well, they believe in some of their own miracles that they'll conveniently pull out, but they don't call them miracles.
...sense, as long as you accept aspects of it, but those things you believe aren't actually true.
Problem is, you'd be surprised how many people are resistant to the notion that the Bible is miraculously theologically coherent. It's very annoying. Something people will usually immediately do is bring up all sorts of supposed contradictions in the Bible, but usually these would be historical things and like numbers and dating. All of that has no bearing on the theological coherence of the Bible. When we're talking about theological coherence, we're talking about what does it say about the nature of God.
All right, so this is convenient, and it's not the first time I've heard it. So let me just get this straight.
That's interesting. Not the first time you've heard it. I've actually never heard anyone else say this, but okay, cool.
All kinds of things.
Yeah, obviously, because the Bible is not a maths textbook. It's not a science textbook. It's not even really a history textbook. Like, it contains elements of history, but obviously it's a historical account with a very clear narrative focus. And we even understand like a lot of... It's almost more like a biopic, right? In that we understand it with biopics. We don't expect them to be completely historically accurate. We expect them to contain some kind of narrative story.
So that's fine. It can have things in it that contradict what we know about the world. It can contradict scientific or historical fact. That doesn't matter.
Sure.
Only what it says about the nature of God matters.
Yeah.
And my question is, how did you determine that the Bible is accurate about the nature of this being?
So... because it's miraculously theologically coherent. That's the argument you're arguing against.
Like, do you know this being? Have you had experience with this being? Why not talk about that untrue religion?
My argument is that from Genesis...
The other thing that's very annoying is this the tendency of this person, and again, I think atheists in general, to interrupt you giving the reasoning for why you believe what you believe by saying, why don't you give us some reasons for what you believe? It's like, these are reasons to believe what I'm saying. That's the thing. It would be nice to have some recognition. If the Bible is miraculously theologically coherent, then that would suggest Christianity is true. It would be nice to get some recognition of that fact. God making the universe is too ridiculous, but protein chains touching each other in water 10 trillion years ago, turning into everything is somehow rational. Yeah.
To Revelation, we have this mind-bogglingly unified X-Factor and his plan for humanity. Now, I could give a broad picture of what I'm talking about here, but so far I've been trying to just talk about stuff that I think someone could only really engage with if they've read the entire Bible, cover to cover, multiple times, back to front, and made a sincere effort to actually understand it on its own terms.
I looked at some of the comments under this video, and one of them was someone saying, I can't believe he wants people to read the Bible back to front. What would be the point in that? What would you learn? Like really taking seriously me saying back to front, when obviously I'm just saying you need to actually make the effort to understand the Bible, and before we can have like a serious conversation about why Christianity is credible. Which again, it's the recurring thing with like the entitlement of atheists, where it's like, oh, I want to respond to this video about why Christianity is true, but I don't want to actually look into the claims made in Christianity. Orthodox Larper says Alec Gunter and President Sunday debated you for 1 hour. I think I heard this. I knew there was a beef between them. Yeah, today I finished responding to President Sunday's video that he did respond to me on Judith Butler. It was genuinely one of the worst videos I've ever watched in my life. What would miraculously theologically coherent look like? Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. So it's something I touch on in the video itself. So if Scarlett does her job, we should see that here. But basically, you would look at the things that the Bible says about God, and then you would see, are these things theologically coherent? Then you would look at other religions. You would realize that other religions do not have this theological coherence. They don't say consistent things about God. They don't have any sort of complicated interplay between different authors over hundreds of years saying all sorts of things about God that all come together. You would recognize, therefore, since this is not something that we ever see happen just naturally through human means, it must be miraculous, and Bob's your uncle. Richard says, all right, so let's see. President Sunday and Alec Gunter disagreed on how to counter your transphobia. The debate was posted yesterday on President Sunday Prime Clips. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it makes you feel, I guess, kind of special to have two weirdos debate exactly how to debunk me. Yeah, so I think, Blake, yeah, you've basically touched on it. Richard, if you don't care about the substance of the claims of Christianity, like, fine, but if you refuse to learn about it, why do you even try to dispute claims like this? Yeah, exactly. That's the other thing. Which, and by the way, I gave people an option. It would honestly be perfectly legitimate for an atheist to say, like, if an atheist did a response to me, and they said, all right, in the first part, he's talking about, his first two arguments are very specifically about the Bible and deep comparative religious study, and that's not something I'm interested in looking at, so we'll just look at his final three arguments, because my last three arguments have nothing to do with this. It's someone's choice to respond to the first two, and I would be fine if someone said, in fact, I would actually respect an atheist if they just said, you know what, this first stuff he's talking about, I don't have the time to talk about it, whatever, I don't have the inclination, so I'm just not going to do it.
Okay, so what if we have, and we still don't accept the same beliefs as you did? And, there are lots of versions of Christianity out there. There isn't just whatever you believe, not just us atheists. I mean, there are lots of different takes on the Bible.
So you'll notice what I said was, oh, goodness me. I said I've only been making arguments that somebody could understand if they've read the Bible in detail. So you're asking, what if someone's read the Bible in detail and they still disagree with me? Well, then we have the argument, right? It's that simple. It's not like this isn't some complicated thing to work out. What I'm saying is that those two arguments, if someone's never picked out the Bible, never read the Bible at all, we can't have this discussion. On the other hand, if someone has read the Bible, if someone understands the Bible, if someone's the type of person who can quote proof texts, all that kind of stuff, say, well, hold on a minute, like they have in their mind ready, locked and loaded, common scriptural evidence for things they believe and all that kind of stuff, then we can have the discussion. This isn't that difficult to understand.
But why, oh why, is it a matter of us wasting our lives reading and rereading a document to your satisfaction? I have, by the way, read the Bible several times.
Oh, hello, Harrington Noetic. I believe you're new. I don't recognize you. Naturalism undercuts any meta-epistemic justification for believing in metaphysical naturalism. That's a fancy series of words. I honestly, I'm not sure I can entirely understand, but yeah, I'm going to power through. Yeah, Orthodox Larper, there's a lot of really powerful prefigurations of the gospel. Are you just LARPing as someone who's Orthodox? Or is it the case that as an Orthodox you reject the Bible? I mean, well, obviously Orthodox reject the Bible, but you don't even want to read it.
Times from different perspectives. And I've read Bible scholars discussing the Bible, the history of the document, the people who put the document together. I've also taken a course on biblical archaeology, which I thought was really interesting.
So my advice to you is, if this is the case, rather than just saying all this stuff, why don't you actually provide some arguments, right? So if you, by the way, please note that in part 1, this woman was given an opportunity to give a strong piece of evidence against the Bible being true. And her piece of evidence, the go-to thing, she said, this is why I do not believe in the Bible. She said, I find the whole idea of God sacrificing himself to himself so that we can win heaven, I don't think that makes any sense. Now, is that a terrible argument? No, okay. Obviously, it warrants a discussion about why do we have this system of substitutionary atonement? How does that all work? It's a discussion worth having, but it's not a great argument. It's not an argument that's really going to keep anybody who understands the Bible. It's not going to leave them scratching their heads. I think every single Christian would agree that there are much more challenging. I think every single Christian could, off the top of their head, name 5 arguments or 5 issues they have with the Bible that run significantly deeper than why did God sacrifice himself to himself, which you only need a basic understanding of the Trinity in order to understand.
Interesting. All of this was out of my own curiosity, and this is also besides having heard it at Mass or heard it during services or, every so often just going back and reading parts of it. So, I have read the Bible. I don't have your take on it.
Which is probably a source.
Again, if you've read the Bible and don't have my take on it, use your Bible knowledge, which you supposedly have, to go against what I'm saying. And by the way, the other thing is, this woman, in terms of the structure of this video, she's shown protracted clips of me saying stuff that just doesn't really matter, that she's clearly not interested in engaging with. She could have made this video better. She could have just played the clips of me making the singular core argument and then said, okay, now I'm going to show, using my Bible knowledge, the issue with this. There's been a lot of stuff here she wouldn't have needed to respond to, that I didn't really need to respond to, because it's not that important.
Frustration for those who, don't want to go to all that effort just to debunk me.
Towards the end of his video, he says he's not trying to convince anyone. These are just reasons that convinced him. And then, in the course of his video, he says shit like this. First, I don't think anything I did would matter unless I agreed with him, because he could always say I needed to reread the fucking thing, in some bespoke way.
All you would have to do is provide a singular, concrete piece of evidence for whatever your reading of the Bible is. That's all you'd have to do. If a Catholic comes up to me and says, oh, I think that salvation by faith alone is wrong, I'm not going to say to them, well, you need to reread the Bible. I'm going to say to them, okay, what's your evidence for salvation by faith alone being wrong? And how would you respond to the verses that point to salvation by faith alone? We'd have a conversation about the actual text. It's not just going to be a case of, you need to read the Bible more.
But I'm not even sure what he is expecting someone to do to debunk his idea that the Bible is accurate about a God that we don't have any experience with.
The really funny thing here is, I think like everyone, the Bible's a complicated book. There are lots of verses, lots of passages that give me pause. And even more so, if I were to count just since I've become a Christian, since I've even been particularly inclined towards this specific argument of the Bible being miraculously coherent, which I say since I've been a Christian, as if those two things are separate. They're very related, but whatever. I have come across so many verses where I've thought, oh no, this is presenting a serious problem for the idea that the Bible is theologically coherent. Because this verse seems to present God in a totally different way, presents the plan of salvation in a totally different way, presents God's morality in a totally different way. I've had genuinely hundreds of moments when reading the Bible, when studying the Bible, where I've said, oh, this seems like the Bible isn't lining up with itself. This seems like the Bible is not being coherent. And then what I've done is I've studied deeper and I've realized, oh, wait, actually, there is an explanation. If you interpret this in light of Scripture, if you interpret this in light of the surrounding text, all that kind of stuff. Or it could be the case that you need to slightly tweak the theological understanding you have with which you're approaching the Bible. That's the other possibility. But you still see that actually the rest of it holds up with that. It's really embarrassing that I'm sitting here as someone who is a Christian who has encountered many examples of, and I'm sure every single Christian who's ever seriously studied the Bible have had moments where there's been something that just seemed to not theologically make sense because it contradicted other parts of what they understood the Bible to be, and it caused them an issue. And then they had to look into it, and they had to study. And I'd say, well, how are we supposed to understand this? And certainly I can say that for the religions I reject, it's because the theological interpretation of their text, if it's different from the Bible, and if it is the Bible, then their theological interpretation of the Bible does not work. So I have a very clear idea of what it would mean for the Bible to not be theologically coherent. And to hear this woman say, what would this even mean for the Bible not to be theologically coherent? It's genuinely bizarre.
Like, how do you go about that?
What I would do is renew my recommendation that you do actually go back and watch all of my other videos about religion in order to understand where I'm coming from when I say all this stuff.
I have to laugh. Yeah, let me go waste some of my time for a lost cause.
I mean, just... It's fine, but like you understand you can't say, hey, this guy hasn't sufficiently proved his claim that all other religions are nonsense. Which, like, how long do you expect that to take me? Do you think I should have spent more time in my over an hour-long video debunking atheism, explaining why all the other religions are wrong? It's just bizarre, because she has repeatedly said, well, I don't understand why this guy thinks that all these other religions are false. I don't understand why this guy thinks that Christianity stands apart as so much more credible than all these other religions. But then the suggestion of just taking... And, like, goodness me, she could listen to them while playing video games or whatever. It's not as if it's some huge burden in her life to just check out my arguments. Or she could just, actually look through the arguments in the description just to see what the arguments are. I just think it's a little bit... Again, it would be fine if she just said, I'm not interested, I'm going to avoid getting into this topic and looking into it seriously. But that's not the attitude she's had.
Look, this video was recommended to me by a viewer, and I decided to give it a go, and I saw some things I wanted to say in response. And I thought it would be fun. But I don't know why, in order for me to argue with Casey, I would have to go watch other videos and spend a few years rereading a book that I've already read to my own satisfaction. Establish your point, for fuck's sake.
But I do know that no matter how many times I recommend that, even people who will complain about my lack of elaboration here will still refuse to actually go and check out.
Yep, well done me. Call me a prophet. Prophet ROM 510, because I called it.
That other content where I do provide a lot more details.
Look, whinging about me not spending more time on your channel isn't serving your cause. I feel like you're padding out.
It's really simple. I knew that there would be people who would literally spend the entire video going, why are you not explaining what your issues are? Like, literally, what you have done this entire video, most of this video, is complain about me not sufficiently having evidenced my claims. So far, all of my claims have been about how Christianity is much more credible than any other religion. You are literally doing the exact thing that I made fun of the idea of someone doing.
Out time here instead of establishing, the Hardy Boys case of the Miraculous Bible.
So what I'm going to do is now talk about how my issues with other religions reveal the miraculous theological coherence of the Bible.
Great. We're off talking about other religions and not your own beliefs. Swell.
It's like she just lacks an ability for kind of second order thinking and recognizing that just because I'm not directly talking about my beliefs doesn't change the fact that I'm talking about how other religions engage with the Bible in order to show how clear the biblical message is, which would be significant if the Bible has a clear message across 1,500 years of having been written by dozens of authors.
So, starting off with Judaism, a few things stand out. The prefigurations of Christ and of the idea of substitutionary atonement are just insane in the Bible. Humanity's shame is covered in the Garden of Eden after an animal is sacrificed to give them a skin to wear. God promises that a son of Eve will crush the head of the serpent.
I'm interested to see what she's going to say to this.
while being injured himself. Cain is rejected by God when he offers the fruit of his own work, while Abel is accepted when he offers up the blood of a lamb. A ram appears on a hill to be sacrificed in place of Isaac. Joseph is betrayed to a regional superpower such that he can be lifted up by God to save many people. And then obviously there's the Passover and everything in the Levitical system of priesthood around sacrifices taking away the guilt for sin. All of it comes perfectly together in the story of Jesus Christ.
Does it?
Okay. Yep.
I mean, to the extent there are similarities, some of it has to do with archetypes in ancient literature. Some of it has to do with the New Testament writers looking for stories and symbols from the Old Testament to embellish Jesus' story and, make it seem prophetic.
But none of those things I just mentioned were prophecies. They were all just things that happen in the Old Testament that happen to come together. But also, there's the fact, how can you say all of that, just those incredible, and that's like a very dense, Genesis isn't that long, it's just incredible density of prefiguration. I was like, oh, it just happened. Yeah. I mean, I suppose it shouldn't be surprising, right? Because, these are the people who, their attitude is, well, everything just comes together to make it so there can be life on Earth. It just happened. Oh yeah, Genesis has just all of these stories that all come together in a way and they don't. That's the other thing. This is why it's worth looking into my issues with other religions, because no other religion has this. It's like if you're saying, oh, New Testament writers, they read the Old Testament and they just came up with a story. Okay, ignoring the fact that then at that point, how much are you actually saying that the story of Jesus was invented? Are you denying his crucifixion? Because there are, again, secular scholars who have said, I think, again, Bart Ehrman, I always come back to him just because he's one of the main secular scholars I'm aware of, has said, I think these are exact words. The death of Jesus Christ by crucifixion is one of the most certain facts of antiquity. I'm pretty sure I've heard that, which, I think needs some qualifying, because you could say, I don't know, what about Rome existed? But, the point is, for as specific as a claim as it is, the fact we have it attested to by 5 separate authors with kind of conservative, or, if you like, I suppose the opposite, liberal datings, possibly dating it to some of them later, but I think at least 4 of them would still be dated to within the lifetime of eyewitnesses. This is the kind of stuff that makes something very credible. So I'm wondering, how much do you think that this was a story people were in a position to be the death of Jesus Christ by crucifixion? And actually, I think there's even other writers from outside the Bible. Obviously, we have death of Jesus Christ by crucifixion mentioned by Paul. He was the earliest person to mention it. Then Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Secular scholars will date John later. But still, again, our reliable historical accounts of the Punic Wars were written 2 centuries after the events they're describing. Actually, historical events are considered quite well attested if they're written decades later, even centuries after the events they're describing. We still consider them somewhat credible. Whatever. Anyway, the question is, ignoring even the question of how much do you think that the writers just had the liberty to completely make up a story that had no historical reality to it at all? Why hasn't anyone else been able to come up with even a fictitious story that lines up with the Old Testament prefigurations in anything like a comparable way? Paul says it was on a pole and never places in a period of time. Mark created the tale and the other 3 ran with it. Some think Mark used Paul, so one source. Oh, goodness me. Yeah, Mr. Charitable over here. So what you're saying here is, first of all, bring up an irrelevant fact. Paul says it was on a pole. Who cares? Second of all, never placed it in a period of time. What do you mean never placed it in a period of time? You think that Paul was saying, so Jesus Christ died by crucifixion 100 years ago. 100 years before he lived. He, like, what is that? And then you kind of say, Mark created the tale? Mark created the tale. But we're talking about how many authors said Jesus Christ was crucified. You said Paul said he was crucified, but possibly on a pole, which I guess we're saying that there's no possibility that the idea of a cross, which has as a big important part of that pole, like, because we literally use the phrase like a telephone pole. You know, telephone poles have a little thing across the top, right? Like, something being a pole doesn't preclude it also having something running along the top, whatever, horizontally. But okay, Paul came up. It's like he said that, but then you're saying Mark created the tale? Anyway.
And in some cases, preachers over the decades found stories they could tell to unify this collection of writings.
I've
Again, whatever.
recently been studying the book of Hebrews, and it's just insane the level of interconnectedness that can be found in the Bible, especially the character of Melchizedek and the fact that he is a priest that precedes Aaron and actually gets the tithe directly from Abraham. And it seems to be setting up this idea that there is a higher priestly order that supersedes the Levitical covenant.
Is it, or are you making a story out of it to make...
Again, I am making a story about it. The fact I can proves it's miraculous scripture and that God's real.
It makes sense. You know, I see Christians make stories from the Bible all the time, and the text doesn't actually support what they say. I watch them smooth out contradictions, so guess what I'm seeing here?
And weirdly, in the Gospels, there is no attempt to liken Jesus to a Levitical priest. We get his whole family history, and none of it comes from the Levite.
So?
Here's the thing. You ask a Jew about any of this, and it means nothing to them. There are loads of things in the Old Testament that sometimes don't seem like they make sense, like all of the apparent grammatical divine plurality, or otherwise just weird idiosyncrasies and recurring narrative motifs. The crazy thing is that Christianity has a better explanation for this than Judaism.
I have no idea what you're talking about right now. And without specifics, what can we do with this?
I gave specifics. What do you just not know, like, the really basic stuff, like there's divine multiplicity in the grammar of the Old Testament? Without intelligence, I don't know what to do with this. Without you actually being able to provide any indication that you have any idea what you're talking about, what am I supposed to say? If I'm just going to mention like really basic baby's first Bible study stuff, and you're just going to be like, well, what are the specifics? Like, I don't know. I'm just...
The Jews have their own idea about how to...
That's a really good point, Richard. Yeah. Like, that's the thing. I love that, yeah. The uncut... So you've just admitted it, the uncut block. It would be nice, but I would say then Mark likely stole it from that author. So, yeah, typical atheist, you have no interest in actually discovering truth. You're just going to jump through whatever hoops you need to in order to deny it. You're literally admitting that no matter how many sources there are, you're just going to say that the first one was making it up and everyone else stole it from them. Cool.
Read the Torah and have concluded that a lot of it is just mythical stories that they've kept for historical value. I have heard an interpretation that the Torah is about the movement from polytheism to monotheism. And at its core, Judaism, as I understand it, is about following the Mosaic law. And for Jews, it's not just the Torah that is important, but the rabbinic writings on how to interpret the Torah.
But if you're an atheist, then you think that the Old Testament was just a load of Jewish people writing down a load of stuff to line up with their Jewish beliefs.
I don't think the Jews see it that way either. To be clear, I see the Old Testament as a collection of writings. Some are old allegorical stories that try to describe the beginning of the world, and some are about the beginnings of the Israelite religion.
Yeah, I'm so done. I'm so done. It's just... Yeah, I get that you just see it like that. The problem is when what you just see as a load of writings actually forms this theologically coherent story that's all pointing to Jesus and is obviously pointing to Jesus, and I point to specifics and you say, well, why haven't you provided any specifics? What's the point? There's nothing like I'm realizing that the amount of progress I've made means that I'm going to have to probably end up doing a part 3 of this. But I'm also like, you've not said anything, so I really just want to jump through this as quickly as possible because I'm so embarrassed.
There are some legal documents about what God supposedly wants people to do as the chosen people. Some stories are attempts at history, specifically concerning the genocides in the Eastern Mediterranean and the kingdoms of Israel and the Babylonian captivity. Some books are poetry. There's a book of Proverbs that's just like a collection of sayings. And there's some batshit crazy books like Joel.
What's it called when it's like a gish gallop, but someone's not actually making an argument? Like, this is just, you're just bringing up a lot, yeah, okay, yeah. But none of this is responding to anything I said.
I guess I just don't see the Jews as merely creating a book about their beliefs.
What we actually see in the Bible is a coherent theology whereby a naturalistic explanation doesn't make any sense.
A naturalistic explanation for what?
For the coherent theology of the Bible. This is not... This is it's literally just like talking to someone who's committed to being as dumb as possible intentionally.
For the Bible itself? From my point of view, it's just a collection of writings people have kept, and some people make religions out of them. But there's nothing miraculous.
Whereas the idea that there was an overarching author of the Bible who had a broader narrative that he wanted written down, that makes perfect sense.
Does it make perfect sense?
Yes.
I don't see it.
That's
I
because you're
see
an idiot.
Christians try to make sense of Old Testament stories in light of Jesus.
And they do that successfully, and you haven't shown they haven't.
And they seem happy with them. But
Yeah.
the text
They're happy with them because they make sense. You haven't provided any evidence they don't make sense.
itself doesn't always support their blabbing.
Okay, you're going to provide any evidence that the text itself doesn't support their blabbing?
You've also probably noticed I've been referring to Catholicism as something distinct from Christianity so far. That's because I'm
Yeah, the uncarved block also showing the epistemological circularity of atheism. Good, love to see it.
an evangelical Baptist. Catholics aren't Christians.
So here is where Casey reveals his affiliation and how he doesn't think Catholicism is Christianity. But when he's talking about Christianity
Yeah, sorry, it's being incredibly charitable that it's taken me this long to call this person an idiot.
being a dominant religion, that can only be true if Catholics are Christians. Again. As for the number of Baptists in the world, it's only between 51 and 100 million people.
And even of them, very few are saved. Again, we're told narrow is the way and broad is the path that leads to destruction. Very few people are saved. That's not what we're talking about.
And by the way, there is more than one kind of Baptist, so whatever KC thinks, those numbers will be even smaller.
Again, the atheistic narrative is that the Catholic Church threw together a Bible that lined up with all of their specific theological and political priorities, and there was no overarching commitment to truth.
I find it interesting that KC seems to juxtapose belief in truth as if in putting together a document that aligned with their beliefs.
The uncarved block, if you want to ask these questions, you're going to have to come another time. I'm too committed to just powering through this video.
Catholics weren't interested in truth. They were just trying to control people, I guess.
Yes.
Look, it is documented that the Church Fathers made decisions about what books would make the final cut. And the Book of Revelation is an especially interesting discussion if you're interested in going and researching it. There are also apocryphal writings that were rejected for some reason or another. I have to say that the purposes of keeping some stories in the Bible were probably for historical purposes, not liturgical ones. And I'm not going to say that I can talk in detail about the establishment of the church, but I have read about it to my own satisfaction. And if it's interesting, go at it, go read about it. It is, it can be interesting. The early church was trying to establish beliefs they thought of as true, and they...
I like this, Yeah, you can chat. Yeah, I like how we've, again, just got a load of talking about nothing really relevant.
selected documents that aligned with that. So I think this reductive history here is really designed to poison the well. I'm going to skip the next part where he talks at length about how evangelicals read the Bible, but Catholics don't, and where he uses, I shit you not, comedic bits from Louis C.K. and John Mulaney to demonstrate that Catholics don't read the Bible.
No, so the demonstration Catholics don't read the Bible is the fact that it's well-known Catholics don't read the Bible. I included those comedic clips because I thought they were funny. Because, a video should actually be entertaining.
Look, I love me some comedy stylings, but these are comic bits. They aren't evidence for anything. Catholics do read Bible passages. During the Mass, they usually read from both the Old and New Testament. I read the whole Bible several times in school, so it's just not correct to say that Catholics don't read the Bible. Sure, there is less of an emphasis on reading it, and especially on interpreting it to your own personal satisfaction, like what you think passages mean. And yeah, it used to be discouraged. Augustine specifically thought that you needed special training to understand what parts of the Bible were allegorical with secret knowledge and which were plain language.
Yeah, I think like you're basically proving my point. Like, yeah, okay, fine. You might have read the Bible. Obviously, they have passages read. I don't think they work their way through the entire Bible in your typical Catholic sermons. But yeah, the main point, obviously, that I was really getting at that matters is that there is a much more pronounced emphasis on reading the Bible within Baptist evangelical circles. I think the other thing that's annoying me is the evident inability, because I'm guaranteeing that Scarlett is not going to show a recognition of the actual argument I'm making. So let's just clarify the argument I'm making so we're all clear. Because you might be like, what does this have to do with atheism? Yeah, that's a good question, because Scarlett has not bothered to show me explaining what this has to do with atheism. So I'll tell you now the argument I'm making. We'll see whether or not Scarlett's able to recognize this. What I'm saying is that if the Bible was produced by the Catholic Church, you would expect the Catholic Church to be the most serious about the Bible. And you would not expect evangelical Baptists, who supposedly, according to atheists, came along 1,500 years later at least, to be the ones who are really, really serious about reading the Bible and put a serious emphasis on the Bible. That wouldn't make much sense. You wouldn't expect Muslims to be really serious about reading the Bible, while Christians don't really care about reading the Bible, because the Bible comes from a Christian tradition. So it would be very weird for the Muslims to be the ones really serious about reading it, and the Christians not really to care. This points to the fact that actually the Bible does not have human authorship, because its human authorship is Catholic, but the Catholics don't care about it, almost as if it wasn't written for them, while the evangelical Christians really care about it because it was written for them, because it was written by inspiration of the Holy Spirit. That's the argument I'm making. Let's see if there's any recognition of that argument.
Anyway, we will pick up with KC after the Mulaney clip about a priest's sermon.
Okay, cool.
So that's sort of weird, right? If atheism is true,
okay.
Wouldn't you have expected that Catholics would tailor this man-made book to fit their man-made religion?
First, what sense does "if atheism is true" make?
So if God does not exist?
I lack belief. That is true.
No, okay, because lacking belief does not make you an atheist. Atheism is the position that God does not exist. If you don't know either way, if you simply lack belief in God because you are not aware one way or the other, or have no knowledge about whether or not God exists, that makes you an agnostic. If you think that you have reasons to believe that God does not exist, you're an atheist.
But I suppose you mean if atheists are right and there is no God, so this religion is wrong.
Yeah, really very simple to work out.
But the thing is, I do think Catholics chose books for reasons that had to do with their beliefs. And the thing is, at the time religion emerged, and the Bible specifically, a lot of people were illiterate and they couldn't read on their own. There weren't even books like we have now. In fact, it would be centuries before books were a thing. There were manuscripts, and you needed to be wealthy to commission writings, and again, nobody could read them anyway. All this to say, I think there are reasons for all of this. A reminder again, I may maybe have said this 1,000 times now, that Catholics are the largest denomination of Christians, and they're fine with the book and how they interpret it, and they don't care about what you have to say. And other denominations of Christians are fine with it too. Again, you're just in one denomination, but really we're off on a tangent. Look.
No, we're not. You're off on a tangent because you haven't actually addressed my argument, right? My argument was, if Catholicism was, rather, if the Bible has a Catholic origin, wouldn't you expect the Bible to line up more with Catholicism? And you've not answered that question. You started talking randomly about how people didn't have as many books back in the past. What's that got to do with anything?
I don't believe in God, so I don't see how this book reveals a real God. It instead is an interesting look at people from a long time ago and how they viewed the world and a deity.
What you certainly wouldn't expect is for a theological position that emerged supposedly 1,500 years later to be actually the one that gels so well with the Bible that you would think that was the position for which this book had been made.
You mean a religion told itself stories for millennia about a book and smoothed out the rough spots and tried to reconcile the contradictions? And in fact, came out of another denomination that it disagreed with for some reason? Why wouldn't we expect that? Just what is your view of history?
Okay, so the argument there is that, well, obviously, the Baptist position is more likely to be the correct reading of the Bible because it's newer, and therefore they would have just worked out all the stuff. Again, first of all, the Bible was written over 1,500 years by dozens of authors. It should not even really be possible to come up with a coherent theology about a book with that kind of origin. But also, there's the fact that what you're suggesting is that the Catholic Church put together the Bible and just wasn't smart enough yet to come up with a theology that made sense. So it had to take 1,500 years for someone to eventually work out the correct reading of the Bible that makes the most sense. That's I wouldn't say that makes much sense, honestly. I would say that actually, while there is an element of, as time passes, ideas will get refined and you might get ideas that make more sense as time goes on. In the case of a religious text, you would expect that the people who were writing that religious text would have the version of beliefs that cohere most of that religious text because they're the ones who wrote it or they're the ones who produced it in the case of the Catholic Church. But that's not what we see at all. And you seem to be admitting that's not what we're saying by saying that actually it's the opposite that happened, that the Baptists have the most correct position, but you're just saying that happened naturally because it developed over time.
In reality, Catholicism contradicts the Bible in myriad ways, and often in quite deep, intricate ways. It's not just surface level. Like, a good example is how in James it says that Abraham is an example of being justified by works and not by faith alone. But then Paul says in Romans, if Abraham was justified by works, he has reason to boast, but not before God. So again, you have this intricate, interconnected theological coherence here, where in the book of John, which is explicitly written so that we can be saved, you have John 3:16 telling us salvation is by faith alone. Whosoever believes will have eternal life. Then you have James appear to contradict this in James 2:24, but then if you just look at Paul, you will see that he explains that this is talking about justification before man, not before God. 3 separate authors all coming together to form a wider picture.
Amen. Honestly, I think as a palate cleanser after this, I'm going to have to listen to my video again. It's so nice to just remember that the Bible is such strong evidence of God. That God's given us his word that has dozens of authors who should have had so many different priorities. If this was a human book, you see what humans are like. When humans write their books, when humans write their philosophy, when humans write their politics, they fill it with their own priorities, their own things that they want to get across. But then you look at the Bible. It's like, even though James and Paul and John and Peter, these people were like different, and atheists will even claim like, oh no, these books weren't even written by the people they were supposedly written by. So that's a whole other thing. But even if we're just taking it as the people as they are, these people had completely different priorities, all that kind of stuff. Never mind the possibility they're just anonymous scribes inserting all of their own ideas. And yet, then you take it all together, and like the amount of times you could just cross-reference, oh wait, no, you're talking about this, but let's look at how this verse is used here, and oh wait, everything suddenly, it perfectly explains this other verse. It's genuinely miraculous, and I cannot stress enough, there is no other book like this. And I keep coming back to, like, it's always something I'm reminded of. I don't know if I mentioned this last time. I'm sure I must have mentioned this last time. I saw a thing, George R.R. Martin recently said that he wishes that he had written the entirety of A Song of Ice and Fire, that series, in one go before publishing it, because that way he could realize if he made some mistakes or he kind of set some stuff up later that wasn't really paid off, he could go back and edit it after the fact. So he, even as just one guy writing one book that he'd planned out in advance, obviously I know it's like the whole Gardner thing, you let the characters develop, but even still, he's realized there's situations where he set some stuff up, he didn't really know where it's going and all that kind of stuff. And then you look at the Bible, which was written by 1500 years, and it's not a fictional account, it's it contains events that are real human history that just happen to line up in this way that fits into this perfect narrative. It's a miracle. Praise God.
Of salvation and justification, all in contradiction of the religion that supposedly produced the Bible.
Let's see what the argument is.
I thought of leaving out this section because it doesn't add much to the overall document, but it does show how Critical thinks through his Bible study.
Okay.
You know, basically like every other believer in a Bible-based religion.
No, because mine actually makes sense. There's no like Catholic way of thinking through the connection between James 2:17 and Romans 4:2. There's no like Catholic interpretation of that. The Catholic interpretation is that's the thing. There's not this idea that atheists have that you can just take verses that have a plain meaning and just pretend that they don't say what they're saying. It's not an actual reality.
I mean, how many times have we heard Christians talk like this? All I have to say is none of this speaks to me of some miraculous quality of the Bible, and it does not demonstrate how all of the Bible lines up with an undemonstrated God. Like, cool, you're in a denomination that has explained your book to your satisfaction, and that counts as proof to you. But every believer has their quirky little take and list of things that
they're all stupid. Every other take is just dumb. That's the situation. This isn't hard. By the way, I've had takes in the past that have been wrong. Now, obviously, I wouldn't say dumb because, you know, the Bible's complicated. I wasn't wrong about, like, really basic stuff. And when I realized I was wrong, I changed my mind. But that's the thing. When I realize that there's stuff that I've believed about the Bible that just isn't correct, and again, it's not been serious stuff, but I've realized some stuff that's just not made sense, I haven't just insisted on it. A good example, I'm sure I have some Calvinists in my audience. I used to be a Calvinist. But you know what? I read where the Bible says that God desires all men to be saved. For a while, I came up with some stupid, it just means like he desires all people to be saved, like all different nations, or, it means that he, like he desires them to be saved. But that's just because that's what he emotionally wants. But he still, because of his commitment to demonstrating his wrath, is going to predestine them to go to hell anyway. Like, I came up with all these explanations. I thought, well, why would I do that? Why would I just... Because, okay, I thought, I met some Calvinists. They seemed pretty smart, cool. But then I thought, no, actually, let's just take what the Bible's saying. Why would I go out of my way to come up with this totally new idea? Like, why? There's just no reason to read the Bible that way. So now if you say, well, Michael, I've got a friend who's a Calvinist and they really seriously read the Bible every single day, and they have this explanation for what these, the verse where it says that God desires everyone to be saved, they think it is because of it. Just, desire means something different, or the whole world means something different than what he's actually saying. I say, why? That's not smart.
People need to do to believe like them, and they can't be bothered to do a real demonstration of their God. How do we know it lines up with God's character?
Thank you, Richard, for defending the gospel, by the way. Like I say, I'm just trying to power my way through this video, so... look, honestly, the Uncut Block, I hope you come back at some point, because I will be engaging with chat a lot more when I've finished with this video.
Or whatever.
Oh, I must admit, I'm actually half tempted, even though, I'm almost like a glutton for punishment. I'm half tempted to actually have a live stream where I just go through the comments. Because I was going through some of the comments, and the comments are just so bad on this video. Like, it's just so many people not understanding the argument at all, but whatever.
Look, obviously, I'm not going to go through the entire Bible and explain how the whole thing might as well be an evangelical Baptist catechism.
Thank God for that.
Because it teaches Baptist theology so clearly. But now I'll just point out that it is the Baptists who are called Bible thumpers, who swear by every word of this book. Meanwhile, it's the Catholics who undeniably at times act like they're terrified of this book because it's an existential threat to their faith. This is not what you'd expect if the Bible has natural human origins. You would expect it to be tailored to the humans who came up with it so that it lines up with their specific faith. And then the people who come along later would be the ones who try to fit it to their bizarre theological innovations.
Again, Catholics do read the Bible. They're not afraid. It's a part of the Mass, and
they're very famously afraid of it. So much. I mean, one of my favorite examples of the Catholic Church, or favorite things about the Catholic Church, is that obviously the Catholics believe that the Catholic Church alone has the official authority to interpret the Bible. I think I'm right. So I think this is the statistic. Do you know how many how many chapters the Catholic Church has interpreted? 6. So they're the only ones with the authority to interpret the Bible. And how many chapters have they officially said these? This is what it means. 6. I can't remember what chapters it is, but whatever. So essentially, the point there you might notice is that they're not saying that they're the only ones who are allowed to interpret the Bible because they want to come up with their own specific interpretation. They're saying it because they want other people to not come up with their own interpretation. Like, I don't believe that Catholics are interested in coming up with their own official Catholic interpretation for Romans 4. No, I think that Catholics are interested in stopping other people from being allowed to interpret Romans 4. Like the Catholic goal is that people, when they read Romans 4, their eyes and they don't think about anything they're actually reading.
They have their own explanation for how to read it. And Catholics, again, still make up the biggest segment of Christians, so God isn't doing anything about that. Second, I guess...
Yeah, I love Romans 4:5. However, to the one who does not work, but trusts God who justifies the ungodly, their faith is credited as righteousness.
From what I've seen, every denomination does all the explaining to suit the Bible to its own needs, including finding workarounds for the verses regulating slavery and why some of the Old Testament doesn't apply. Like, none of that seems spiritual or miraculous to me.
To me, a spiritual explanation makes a lot more sense. The Spirit was there upholding God's word, even while a spiritual rebellion led to the religion that supposedly created the Bible actually rejecting it.
Again, just people finding a way to make a text work. Humans being humans.
Again, you can't. I don't understand this thing. I'm sorry. Do you think that I could just make Harry Potter work with Christianity? Do you think I could make Lord of the Rings work with Christianity? No, because those books have they're not theological books. They have quite different morals. I was going to say, like Harry Potter, for example, has like magic and stuff that would be considered dark magic, whatever. The point is, this idea that take any text and just be like, oh, I'll just come up with my own completely, like, just wholesale original theology around it. It doesn't make sense, and it's certainly not comparable to what we have with the evangelical Baptist relationship to the Bible.
Next up, he talks about Islam and how they try to make the Bible work, but he thinks it doesn't. And I don't care.
Hey, the uncarved block, where does it say dead faith can't save?
About his discussion here. I guess it just mainly shows how everyone is trying to make a book line up with their beliefs, and they think it's fine. Keep in mind, Muslims make up nearly a quarter of the world's population. I mean, this isn't miraculous.
So I actually know, like I said, I skipped through this video. I know something that's coming up. And that comment's very funny. So just pay attention to that. Usually, like I said, I don't pre-watch these videos. I mean, I didn't pre-watch this video, but I did just skip through just to see, kind of some of what was being said. And I know for a fact that comment there is very funny based on something we're about to see.
Miraculous or spiritual in any way. It's people doing people shit. Somehow, Islam failing at this shows that you can't adapt the Bible to religious beliefs. It only fits to his version of Christianity, and I just have to do a serious eye roll on that. So he says there's no through line to Muhammad, like there is this miraculous through line for Christianity. And amazingly, all these authors writing at different times do point to Christianity. Look, I don't know enough about Islam, and I don't care. I need something more than my book seems best suited to what I believe. So let's get back to the Atheist.
Okay, so, there was already an acknowledgement of the Muslim thing. I know there's going to be a moment later on where she just says, oh, I don't care about what the Muslims believe. It's like, okay, so again, that's important. That's relevant, right? If you're going to say, oh, by the way, look, 25% of people are Muslim, isn't that suspicious? Or whatever, doesn't that prove? But then, like, if I can show, oh, wait, Islam makes no sense when viewed in light of supposedly being a progressive revelation, and you're just going to willfully ignore that, what am I saying? Like, I cannot argue. There's no point if you're just going to ignore my arguments.
So in my view, the issue with those three other religions comes together to not just disprove those three religions, but also to disprove atheism. The main counter-argument I get from atheists is, well, what if I wrote some theologically coherent thing? Would that automatically make it true? Atheists really, really love this style of counter-argumentation where they say, well, you've presented this argument for God, but it could actually apply to loads of other stuff as well. But the thing is, in this case, I can just say, yeah, I would think that would make it true, or at least it would give me serious reason to consider it as true. Do you know why I could make that concession so easily without any issue? Because on this point, there is nothing remotely comparable to the Bible.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I have to say, I do not see the Bible as anywhere near as coherent as he presents it here. I mean, people make up through lines in the Bible, summarizing bits and glossing over bits and explaining away contradictions.
I really don't like this woman's tendency to just start every single response off by saying, I have to say, I don't really see how what he's saying here is true. It doesn't seem to make much sense to me that he said this, and that's not really my experience, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, okay, obviously we know you disagree. You're wasting a lot of time in your videos by just saying you don't agree. Why don't you start off with an argument, right? Like the first thing I would do is if someone said, well, there's nothing like the Bible in terms of content, just say something that you think is like the Bible, right? Don't just start your response with, honestly, I don't know what's being said. I don't think that makes sense. In my experience, that's not actually true. I really don't know where Casey's coming from here.
Take the Easter story. The Gospels have 4 different versions, contradicting one.
Atheists assuming Islam is the same as Christianity is one of the most funny things that have come up in my conversations. Yeah, it's bizarre. I mean, the other really funny thing, of course, is when like Muslims do bad things, put it broadly speaking, and then you'll get atheists like, oh, this is why religion is so terrible. It's like, okay. It's like, oh, like child marriage in Yemen or something. Like, oh, I can't believe this guy married a 9-year-old. Oh, religion's horrible. It makes people do such evil things. Right? There's only one religion that says that the pattern of conduct for all humanity married a 9-year-old.
One another. But Christians have created one coherent version of the Easter story to explain all that away and make it seem like it congeals, like it's something that works. But if you actually read the 4 Gospels, you'll see what the issues are. And I have issues with the allegorical beginnings of the Bible.
Sorry, okay, so again, there's no theological contradiction in the Easter stories. There is a strange situation, which, by the way, obviously I know that what's-his-face, the Uncarved Block, has been saying, like, oh, the Gospels copied each other. Then why do you think they contradict on the resurrection account? Because it's kind of a weird thing where it's like, I've never understood how atheists will claim, oh, the Gospels all just copied each other, they're not independent accounts, but then also say that they contradict each other. Doesn't really make much sense. With that said, I don't know. I mean, in some sense, I'm almost like, I don't even want to argue that the Gospels don't contradict each other, because to be honest, if they contradict each other on a historical point, that's fine, because the only historical thing that matters is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. They all agree on that, even if it's the case that they were disagreeing over exactly who was there and when people were there. I think we can, having said that, reconcile the gospel accounts together. Some of it always seems a bit... The one thing that I don't really like I've never really got my head around it, is people who say that Judas, he hung himself in the field and then the branch broke and that caused him to like spill open and stuff. The 2 different accounts of Judas always seemed a bit weird to me, because one of them, he seems like kind of repentant in the end, and then in the other one, he seems to just go off and live his happy life, and then obviously die, whatever, I don't know then. So there are like historical things in the Bible that I'm like, oh, that doesn't really line up. But again, there's no theological importance to Judas, or no massive theological importance to Judas having done either of those things. I think the only thing I would say is maybe you could say that there is a certain theological point to the idea of Judas being a bad person, just an unequivocally bad person, but whatever.
Bible, which do not line up with what we know through science. They read more like myths. There are also the supposed historical events like Moses and the events of the Exodus, for which not only is there no evidence, but positive evidence against those events. I think a lot of the Mosaic Law reads like ancient people's ideas of the world, not some perfect all-knowing being. And really, the idea of some disembodied mind needing sacrifices to atone for minor transgressions or cleanse people from having a period or giving birth is strange to me. Sure, you can skip the inconvenient parts for your through line, but those parts you gloss over create real issues for me, and I can't accept this book as some perfect fit for you, that some perfect God.
It's so funny to me that this woman was like, oh, we need specifics. And yet she hasn't really given any specifics at all. Like, what specific thing in Exodus do we have direct evidence against? What is the substance of that evidence? What is the specific issue with, all the things she's bringing up?
God gave to us as a way to demonstrate his perfect character.
And I guess an atheist might want to invoke a hypothetical and say, well, what if there was an example of an intricate, elaborate, yet logical and coherent story? Would that prove it was divine? But the thing is, even in that case, what we'd be talking about is the product of a small handful of people working directly with each other. It's not comparable to what we have in the Bible, which is dozens of authors writing over hundreds of years, all independently, contradicting on some minor points so that we know they weren't collaborating, but on the broader stuff, the stuff that actually matters, the theological substance of the Bible, they are in total agreement. The sophisticated, complicated theological coherence of the Bible would be impressive if it was just from one person writing within one lifetime. The fact it comes from multiple authors across such a long period of time, that's what makes it, in my view, miraculous.
Okay, so coherence is evidence something is true now?
Yes.
I can't take this seriously.
Okay, it's very simple. Okay. You're ignoring everything else I've said. You're ignoring all the focus I'm putting on the fact that this is even within the lifetime of a single author writing one book with only themselves to consult. They still struggle to produce coherent stories. And then I'm contrasting that with the fact this was written over hundreds of years, in reality 1,500 years, but hundreds of years by dozens of authors. You're ignoring everything I'm saying that points to it being true or miraculous and true. You're ignoring my actual argument, which is fine.
And I think it's just because you don't think that there's anything coherent out there, like there's literature or movies that are coherent.
Yeah. What's going to be your counter?
And I just think that we are operating in bad faith right now.
You are operating in bad faith?
We're going to skip over his two examples of how hard it is to have a coherent story because I'm not interested in them. He has a description for Stranger Things and Everything Everywhere All at Once. He apparently does some movie reviews on his channel too. All I can say is based on what he says here, I have no interest in watching his reviews. I don't want to take time on my own analysis of these works, but I think Stranger Things, a series that began more as an homage to 80s pop culture that didn't necessarily expect to get renewed as many seasons as it got and had no endpoint but kept going and got some audience capture, is a terrible example of demonstrating the difficulties of a coherent story.
You're comparing that to the Bible. So you're saying, well, Stranger Things, obviously we wouldn't expect Stranger Things to be coherent because it started off as a completely different genre and then they didn't have an immediate plan of how to transition it into something else and it just kept going, and all those things would mean we wouldn't expect it to be coherent. Meanwhile, we're talking about the Bible. Do I need to actually walk everyone through the issue there? With saying, well, we wouldn't expect something that started with one genre and then kept going and there was no immediate plans to end it and it just kind of fizzled out and it went well beyond the original source material and therefore it wouldn't be coherent. But by the way, there's nothing impressive about the Bible being coherent. Okay, whatever, fine.
Like, how about pick something that maybe could be considered coherent, but no, get something that's just like low fruit.
This is exactly like that one meme with the guy pointing out most circles in the pile are red, but one says, what about the blue one? And yeah, that's it.
Fruit.
I think we take this for granted because there is a miracle that, in my view, proves that God exists, that happens every Sunday.
Sorry, I didn't read your point. So the uncarved block, can you just say in one comment? So do you think the Gospels contradict while simultaneously thinking the Gospels copied each other?
Somewhere in an evangelical church, people pick up this book and they treat it as one unified story coming together to be entirely about Jesus, and it worked.
Seriously?
Yep.
That's a miracle for you?
Yeah, it is. Mhm.
Of course this works.
No, not of course. Because I've literally spent you literally just... What if there was an entire church of people who came together and they treated Stranger Things as a singular, unified, coherent story? You've already admitted the kind of limitations to Stranger Things, in your mind, seemingly precluded the possibility of it being a coherent story. But every single thing you brought up for Stranger Things applies even more to the Bible. But then you're saying, well, of course the Bible is coherent. Of course someone could take the Bible and make it work. What are you saying?
The Bible has been examined and smoothed over and picked to death to make it work. Your stories have been made to work.
What do you mean made to work? Hello. We can't... You can't change what's there. What do you mean made to work? Who made it to work? When? Where?
You know, miracles really do have a low bar these days. And let's keep in mind, different religions and denominations use this book differently. They come to different conclusions, you know. Again, it's just humans humaning. That's all we have here.
Many churches preach out of the Old Testament regularly. Not as much as the New Testament, because that's newer, and therefore it's a little bit more relevant to nowadays. Still, I've sat through preaching series on many books of the Old Testament, and it's always treated as the authoritative Word of God that has value for us as Christians. There's no moment of, oh, whoops, let's ignore that. Clearly that's not part of Christian theology.
LOL, maybe they skip over all the parts about slavery and genocide and rape. You know?
Well, that doesn't contradict Christian theology, so you wouldn't. I mean, no, we don't skip over all the parts about slavery and genocide and rape. It depends how you define rape. I'm just kind of thinking. So I'm thinking like certainly references to slavery have been found in the Bible, because obviously, you know, you have recently even we were talking about like one of the parables that Jesus was talking about where he mentioned slaves was being preached on in church liturgy. This was just like a few weeks ago. And genocide, I don't think that at my church they preached on genocide. I will say in my old church when I was at university, they preached on genocide. And I mean, they did preach on rape, but again, it was so the story of Dinah getting... Her name is Dinah, isn't it? It's not Diana. It's Dinah. Anyway, yeah, basically where she gets sexually assaulted by... Ooh, what's his name? Is it Hamish, or am I just making it up? I'm trying to think what his name is. But yeah, basically that whole story. But of course, in that situation, it's not the... it's not a matter of the... good guys doing that.
No. Oh, wait. Maybe they do read those parts. Those are kind of popular these days. Okay, we're going to skip over another part about Islam because I don't care about how they would or would not use the Bible.
Yeah, so this is the bit that I said was really funny, right? To, like, have this whole focus on, oh, Islam's the, you know, a really big religion. Isn't this crazy that Islam's such a big religion? You don't have a response to that, all that kind of stuff. And then to just ignore the fact that my direct point of comparison for showing why Christianity makes sense is to show how much Islam doesn't make sense. Just, yeah, again, an absolute refusal to actually engage in my argument. Which, look, again, it would be fine if this entire first part of her video, because there's a whole second part that's apparently coming at some point, if this entire first part had just been 10 seconds, well, I don't know, however, maybe a minute or whatever, at the start of part 2, just saying, hey everyone, you know, he spends a lot of time talking about the Bible and theology and things like that, and it's just, you know, quite involved stuff I didn't really want to talk about. That would have been fine. But to spend all this time talking about this and to not even engage with any of my arguments is insane.
It does not make sense that Christians preach from and study the Old Testament as if there exists this unified singular work called the Bible. It does not make sense that Scripture alone is the position of evangelical Baptists.
So wait, the uncarved block, are you saying that they used the text but they didn't read the gospel account in the text?
instead of the supposedly earliest sects being the ones that are the strictest about sticking to the scripture. It's taken for granted that all of this just makes sense naturally when Islam shows us what actually happens when someone just tries to contrive this after the fact. I understand that no matter what I say, there will be people who just say, no, it obviously makes sense that the Bible is the product of dozens.
Dude, look, I'm literally the uncarved block. You need to understand how like actual arguments work, okay? I'm asking you one singular question, just one question. I don't care about anything else you're saying. I'm asking you. This is the only thing I'm asking. Everything else, look, you could write right now just definitive 100% undeniable proof that God does not exist in the comment section right now. I'm going to ignore it because that's not what we're talking about. I'm asking you one question. Do you think that Matthew and Luke used Mark such that it doesn't... How do you reconcile that with your presumed belief that the resurrection account in the Gospels contradict each other? That's the only question I'm asking.
Of authors over hundreds of years. This is exactly...
And it shouldn't even be like, I don't know, it should, like, you can literally just say, yeah, I do. Like, if you wanted to, you could just say, yeah, I think that, you know, Matthew and Luke, they had access to Mark, but they just didn't have access to the gospel, to the resurrection account, and therefore they contradicted it. You could say that if you wanted to, but you could say they only had access to parts of Mark. I'm not even like presenting this as some... Of course they read the entire document. Okay, so I don't know, are you like trolling me? Are you being hilarious right now? Because again, but you said that you think the gospels contradict each other on the resurrection account.
The kind of text that you would expect resulting from that process. But honestly, I think you are just taking the Bible for granted in that case. You think because...
That's the thing. I do think people just take the Bible for granted. And it's a real shame because I think the Bible is so miraculous, but I think the Bible is almost a victim of its own popularity. Because the Bible is so popular, people are just like, yeah, this is just what happens when dozens of authors write over hundreds of years. They produce a text like this. It's like, no, they don't. That's not what should have happened. That doesn't actually make sense. It's crazy that happened.
We have this text that proves it's possible. It's possible because it proves God exists.
So that's kind of his summary. He sees this book as miraculous. It's miraculous that all these people were working over the millennia to create this book that somehow all coheres for his particular version of Christianity. And Islam shows that you can't just come along and make it work. But that just doesn't follow. I mean, just because one sect doesn't make the book work to your satisfaction,
none of them make it work.
Doesn't mean another group can't come along. I mean, these are separate kind of pathways. One doesn't cancel the other out. And of course, we're not.
Yeah, but you've like implied heretofore that it's just super easy, that you could just make it work. But Islam can't make it work.
Considering history of religion, like where does his particular belief come from? Because it didn't just pop into existence. It came out of some form of Christianity, you know. So why don't you look at how did Judaism actually become early Christianity, which became Catholicism, which then spread around and separated out. And I mean, the history of...
Yeah, so this is just talking about unrelated stuff. You're just... Yeah, you're talking about what matters is where we're at now. And I don't know, like what is I'm trying to think, like what is the, because I feel like maybe there's supposed to be some kind of argument here, but I can't work out what it would be supposed to be.
Christianity really is about splitting apart and saying that the new denomination has the right way of reading the Bible and the other ones don't. You know, I just don't see anything miraculous about this. You know what would be miraculous? That the science and history we learn matches perfectly with what the Bible says. And then everyone reads this book and agrees on what it means and how to use it. And we all immediately believe the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. It would be miraculous if human beings suddenly weren't human beings, except if human beings weren't human beings, then, you know, we talk about a completely different world, so who would care? Right, I think we're going to call it now. I don't care about the last few minutes of the video. Minute and... Oh, it's almost 2 minutes, but it feels like we're wrapping up, so I don't care. All right. Bye, everyone. This was very disappointing. I feel like I don't know, maybe I was just naive in the first part. I actually was kind of excited for where this was going, and now I feel... I think the worst thing a video can do is make you feel stupid for having thought it would be worth responding to in the first place. And yeah, I am still going to respond to part 2, mostly because part 2 should be slightly more interesting, because she can't just go back to this whole, well, I don't care about theology, I don't care about the Bible, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's go. I mean, well, I'm going. You should all go in your own separate ways. Goodbye. I'll say goodbye to everyone, just in case people say goodbye. Goodbye, Richard. Goodbye, Caster By Now. Goodbye, the Uncarved Block. Oh, there's someone else who's been commenting recently. Oh, of course, remember to like the stream before you go. Please. That would be appreciated. All right. Bye.